Okay, from the roof of the Bally's parking garage, you probably call it the Horseshoe parking garage, with the Paris hotel rooms behind me, you probably call it Paris. Total time, let's make some room over there. Total time clocked in, that was very, very close. That was only a 2-minute difference. That's negligible to me. That's awesome. So that includes that first day where my card wasn't working and I had to just write it down and hope that someone manually put in the hours. So all that happened. 2-minute difference, that's very close. Awesome. However, the overtime hours, I don't know how they're calculating overtime. I had a number for my overtime hours, and the number Orleans gave me for overtime hours was about 5.5 hours below. Whatever, it's not a huge deal. It's only like a $30 difference. That was a little off, not a huge deal. The other number I got was the number for dealing tournament downs. That number was about $160 more than I expected. We're guaranteed $15 per Hold'em tournament down. We're guaranteed $20 for a tournament down for any other game. What we're looking at in total here is like, the tournament downs was 160 more than I thought. So just thinking about that, I'm like 160 ahead. The overtime hours, I was like shorted 30 bucks about, but combine those two and I'm still like 130 ahead, and I never got paid for my orientation day. Remember that video? Link at the top of the screen, where I was staying at Rio and then walked across the street to Gold Coast and did some orientation stuff. I never got paid for that, even though we're supposed to. So that was about $30 I never got. So combine that also, and it's like plus 160, minus 30, minus 30. It's like I'm still $100 ahead than what I expect. Second pay stub was made available. And let me explain what I saw in the pay stub. Okay, hope you enjoyed the background picture. Some huge pot at MGM a few months back. Anyway, there is my accounting and there is the Orleans accounting. So first, total hours on the clock. I had myself at a certain amount of hours. The Orleans had me at 11 more minutes. Okay, awesome that it's a little more, not less, like at other jobs where it was always a little less if it wasn't exact. I don't know, maybe just a rounding thing that we're off a little bit. I was like 3 minutes off the first pay stub, and then over these 14 calendar days, 13 of which I worked, 11 minutes off. Okay, that's about the same. Overtime hours, still something is off that I'm not aware of. I had a certain amount of overtime hours for myself. Orleans had a number that was 7 hours, 25 minutes on the short side. So don't know what's going on with the OT hours, but it was less. But it's not really, well, it was fewer. It's not really a big deal because of the down rates to me. So the pay for down rates, for dealing tournament downs, because the cash game tips I just cash out at the end of the night and I go home with it. The down rates for the tournaments, I need to wait to get paid by Orleans. It was 14.59% more. I'm giving you this number as a percent because of the rest of the math. So let's look at this. Here we go. Hold'em tournament down rates. I had 87 by my accounting. The pay stub doesn't say how many down rates. It doesn't break it down by Hold'em and non-Hold'em. It doesn't say the number at all. It just says the dollars. So we just have to go with my number. 87 down rates, 87 downs in Hold'em tournaments, and the number is $15 per down guaranteed. In non-Hold'em, which I'll just call mixed game tournament downs, I dealt 37 in this pay period, and we're guaranteed $20 per mixed game down. So if you wanted to know the weighted average, this is how you do it. 87 for the Hold'em downs divided by 124, the total amount of downs. 87 plus 37 is 124. Multiply by $15, then add 37 divided by 124, which is the fraction of total downs that were mixed game downs, and multiply that by $20, the mixed game down rate. So it should be $16.49, the weighted average for tournament downs. I dealt 124 downs, and the weighted average is $16.49 per down.
That's by my accounting, but things were 14.59% more. So multiply that weighted average in my accounting times 1.1459, which means we're adding 14.59% to it, and that's 18.89. That was, according to the pay stub, what I got in my weighted average for tournament down rates. So we could do that for each type of tournament also. Hold'em tournament downs, it's guaranteed at $15, but add 14.59% to it, and I actually got paid $17.19 per Hold'em tournament down for this last pay period, and do the same thing for mixed. Guaranteed at $20, but add 14.59% to it, and I actually got paid $22.92 per mixed game down rate this last pay period. So, from last pay period, I felt like I was like $100 ahead, even though overtime was a little off and never got the orientation pay. In this one, I feel like I was short about $42 on the overtime pay, but I got about $298 more than I expected for down rates. So you combine those, and it's what, $256 ahead this pay period, and then add the 100 from last pay period, and I feel like I'm $356 ahead of what I expected, of like what, you know, I thought the numbers were when I signed up for this. So, all right, third pay stub, gonna get 4 total. Third, I have 2 numbers that I think people are gonna find very, very interesting. The first one, time on the clock. That was correct. I think Orleans had me on the clock for 7 minutes more than my accounting. Awesome. 7 minutes over a 2-week period is a negligible difference. Still something weird about the overtime, which I don't really care about. It's not much. I guess I could talk to HR and ask like just what the rule is so I'm aware, but it's weird because it's not a number such that I'm only getting 40 hours. Like, I'm only getting the weekly overtime beyond 40. It's a number in the middle. Like, there's just getting weekly overtime, and then there's weekly and daily. It's in the middle of that. So it's like I'm getting some daily overtime, but not all. I don't know. Something's going on, but whatever. The first big number that I think everyone's interested in, how much I got in tournament tips, because I know how many Hold'em downs I dealt. I know how many mixed game downs I dealt in the tournament. And then I see a number in the pay stub, you got paid this much for dealing tournaments. And in the first paycheck, it was about $160 more. In the second, it was about like $295 more. It was $777 more than my accounting. My only guess for what could be causing that is that the third pay period was the time that included the main event. So that was a huge prize pool. First place was 200 grand. If there was no deal, I guess it's just that a lot of people at the final table left some large tips. I don't know what else would be the reason for that, but that was a lot of extra. And that means after the first paycheck, that extra money, which, you know, was tips for tournaments, but then minus never getting the orientation pay, minus some overtime hours missing, I felt like I was ahead $100. In the second pay period, doing the same thing, extra in tips, but less overtime hours, felt like I was $250 ahead or so. And then in this one, the tips minus the overtime hours I didn't get, I feel like it's about $700 ahead. So 100 plus 250 plus 700, it's about $1,050 ahead of what I expected, just based on what we're guaranteed for our tournament downs. Another number that's very interesting is what I got ultimately looking back, or I guess for you in the camera, looking back, if you're going left to right, as like a timeline. So I counted all the Hold'em downs I dealt so far from my first day, May 26th, through the final day of the third pay period, July 4th, counted all the mixed game downs. So I have each of those 2 numbers, I have the total downs, and I know from the 3 pay stubs the sum I've gotten paid for tournaments in those first 6 weeks dealing at Orleans. So I'll spare you the math. Through 6 weeks, May 26th through July 4th, Hold'em tournaments, we were told we were guaranteed 15 per hour, and the number's right here. So like going forward, like when I was dealing on that first day a no limit Hold'em tournament, like okay, this down, I'm going to get $15 pre-tax. But now that it's in July and I'm looking backwards, this is how I'm thinking about it. Looking back, what was I actually getting paid with the tournament tips included? Hold'em tournaments were guaranteed at 15. Looking back, I was actually getting paid $17.96 per down. For the mixed game downs, we were guaranteed $20 per down. I was actually getting paid $23.95 per down when I count in all the tournament tips. And, you know, the weighted average, I've dealt way more hold'em downs than mixed game downs. There's just way more hold'em tournaments, and they last longer, and there are larger fields. So it's a weighted average. And if you don't want to think about two different things, hold'em, non-hold'em, and like, I have to think about both things if I want to think about this number. Maybe you're thinking about dealing Orleans next year, maybe somewhere else. I'll get it down to one number for you. The weighted average of those two numbers. So it has to be somewhere between $17.96 and $23.95. Of course, it's going to be a little closer to $17.96 because it's just way more hold'em downs. The weighted average, $20.08. So looking back through the first 6 weeks of work at Orleans, every time I dealt a tournament down, regardless of what the game was, every time I dealt a tournament down, I got paid $20.08 with the tips included. Most of it is the guarantee from Orleans, and some of it is tournament tips from the players in the tournament. Figured out the overtime thing finally with the help of Matt from Australia, who suggested something which made sense, and then I did the calculation and the numbers came out correctly. This is what Matt suggested. If you think of every day, not just as total hours, but as like non-overtime hours and overtime hours. Early in the week, you'll have some portion of your day be non-overtime hours and daily overtime. You get more than 8 in a day, daily overtime. But don't count those daily overtime hours towards your 40 hours for the week in order to trigger weekly overtime. So row across the top is just going to be days of the week. So the day, the name doesn't matter. Tuesday, Wednesday, whatever. Just days 1 through 7. Okay. The spacing might look a little weird. No, the spacing is perfect. You'll see at the end. Second row is going to be how many hours I worked each day. This is an example, not an actual week I worked. But in this example, and then the final 2 rows are going to be regular hours and overtime hours. And you'll see that I'm also going to separate overtime hours into 2 different categories: daily overtime hours and weekly. So let's put some numbers in here. Day 1 of the work week, I work 9 hours. Don't think of it as 9, think of it as 8 plus 1. Because once I hit 8 hours, daily overtime is triggered. So my first 8 hours of day 1 are regular hours. I get paid the regular wage. Then the final hour of that day, I get paid my overtime wage because it's overtime. What type of overtime? It's daily overtime. Haven't hit 40 for the week. It's not weekly overtime, it's daily overtime. I worked more than 8 hours in one day. So when I'm thinking about weekly overtime now, I'm really not at 9 for the week so far, I'm at 8. Because I only worked 8 regular hours. So let's go to day number 2. Say I worked 10 hours. So think of this as 8 plus 2. 8 regular hours and 2 overtime hours. And what type of overtime? Also daily. I got more than 8 hours in the day, so it's 2 daily overtime hours. Let's say day 3 is identical to day 2. I worked 10 hours. So it's 8 plus 2 is how we're thinking about it. And the 2, again, daily overtime. Not weekly yet, daily overtime. And let's say day number 4 is identical to days 2 and 3. I work 10 hours. Think of it again, 8 plus 2, and the 2 is daily. Okay, now gets a little more interesting, slightly more complicated, but let's say on day 5, I work 7 hours. So no daily overtime. I didn't break 8 hours in a single day, so think of this as 7 plus 0. 7 regular hours and 0 overtime hours. Didn't get more than 8 in a day, no daily overtime, so it was 0 down there. And before I go to day 6, let's look at this for a second. Let's look at total hours. 9 plus 10 plus 10 plus 10 plus 7 is 46. So 46 total hours worked for the week. Okay, now let's move that green box down a little bit. 8 plus 8 plus 8 plus 8 plus 7, 39 regular hours. Even though I worked 46 total, 39 hours I got paid my regular wage. 39 regular hours so far. And move that green box down a little bit more. 7 overtime hours. So that's the breakdown of the 46 total hours I've worked. 39 regular, 7 overtime. The 39 regular needs to get to 40 in order to trigger the weekly overtime. Okay, so now, and yeah, all those 7 overtime hours were daily overtime, not weekly yet. So now let's get rid of all that. And day 6, how many hours do I work day 6? Let's say I work 7 hours. Okay, how are we viewing that 7? It's going to be 1 because I only needed 1 more hour to get to 40 for the week in terms of regular hours, this third row in the grid. And then, so there you go, 8 plus 8 plus 8 plus 8 plus 7 plus 1, 40. Now I'm at 40 hours for the week, hours in which I was paid my regular rate. And the other 6 are now overtime, not daily anymore, but 6 weekly overtime hours because I met the criterion of 40 regular hours for the week. Everything for the rest of the week now is going to be weekly overtime. So let's say on the final day of the week, day 7 of the week, I work 4 hours. It's going to be 0 plus 4. No regular hours. I'm beyond 40 for the week, but I get paid overtime for all these. They're not daily, but they're weekly. As soon as I work that first hour on day 6, everything else for the rest of the week, weekly, because I met the criterion, 40 hours for the week. So 4 hours of overtime on the final day of the week, and weekly overtime now. Beginning of the week, the overtime was daily when I was breaking 8 hours in a day, and then once I got to 40 regular hours for the week, at the end of the week, my overtime hours, we can label them weekly overtime hours. Thanks to Matt from Australia again, because I understand the overtime rules now. Overtime was exact to the minute. So, finally got that figured out. It'll be helpful next year. Total time on the clock was almost exact. Orleans had me on the clock for 1 more minute than my records had. It's very good, very close. The other thing I wanted to say was tournament tips. I got an extra about 483 in tournament tips. This one, an extra 483. So I think in the first pay stub, there were 4 pay stubs in the first 4 pay periods. In the first one, I got like an extra 160 or something. Let's make room on the screen. And in the second one, like an extra 300 almost. In the third, like an extra 770. And in this one, an extra 483. So I remember the total to the dollar. It was like 1,726 and some cents in tournament tips. There's a row in the pay stub for what you got for dealing tournaments. Wage is its own row. Regular wage, overtime wage is its own row. I have no idea what you make dealing cash. I didn't even deal cash in the final pay period. And then there's tournaments. And I can multiply, you know, the hold'em downs by 15, plus the mixed game downs by 20, the guarantees, and know what I had guaranteed, and then anything extra is a tournament tip. So yeah, over the course of the summer, about $1,726 in tournament tips. And remember, rice is a spoon food.